that is going to ripple into everything else. And that is where you get lasting transformation. Now, people who don't have emotion driven behavior, scripts and stories and metaphors, that stuff works really quick. But for emotion driven, it is going to be very what we call gunshot effect. You don't know what's going to hit the target. And that's why, with a classical style of hypnosis, it takes a lot longer to get results.
Hello, this is the Mae B Mindful Podcast, and I am your host, Hannah Mae. I'm a mother of 6, conscious birth instructor and educator, spiritual growth facilitator, and certified hypnotist. This podcast is about inspiring hope, expanding awareness and consciousness in order to revolutionize the way we live and experience our lives. You can expect thought-provoking episodes each week spanning a range of topics, drawing from both my own journey of transformation and healing and working with others. I hope you find this podcast to be informative, refreshing, illuminating, and instrumental in your own soul's evolution and growth. Let's jump right in. Hello, all. Welcome back to the Mae B Mindful Podcast. I'm so excited that you're here because today I have a pretty awesome guest for you all, and I really go ahead and save this, by the way, download this episode because it's slightly longer and I want to make sure that you can go back to it, listen to it when you want, because there's so much in here. I think you guys are going to be hanging on every word, especially if the conversation around hypnosis is something that you're wanting to know more about, dive a little more into. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce her before I introduce her again. Penny Chiasson, everybody, is a board certified hypnotist, best-selling author of Breaking the Fibro Code, and the creator of the Identity Matrix, and founder of Elite Hypno Pro. She trains high-caliber professionals to master the subconscious mind and create profound, lasting results. She also has a podcast. It's called the Soul Fusion Podcast, and she shares real grounded conversations about subconscious transformation, spiritual alignment, and becoming who you're here to be. Obviously, we get along. She is zero fluff and full integrity, and I can really speak to that. She is, in fact, zero fluff and full integrity. So without further ado, here she is. I'm so excited to have Penny here with us because Penny is a boss, and you'll find out why. I'm so excited to have you here to talk to my listeners as another hypnosis professional in this field, because I feel like you bring so much depth and clarity and credibility to this profession that a lot of people have a lot of apprehension around, that still needs to be largely demystified. And there's some confusion around and some weird ideas around, and there's a pretty broad range also in styles. Not all hypnotists are equal. Not all programs, teaching, training programs, or organizations are either. And I can speak from my own experience with that as a hypnotist, being through different types of training, and also as a client and working with different practitioners. So, I'll let you talk more about this, but I know you come originally from a medical background. And I always think that's really interesting and amazing, not because it's necessary to make someone an amazing hypnotist and an expert, but I think it does bring a lot of, well, for a lot of people, I think that brings a lot of credibility, right? But you also just come from such a well-rounded, knowledgeable, grounded place with that. And you've had a whole journey with that. So I'm wondering if you can just tell us a little bit about your experience and why you left the profession that you were in, that I'm sure provided a lot of security in, that you were very established in, and ended up coming into this wacky world, which of course we know it's not wacky, but yeah.
People perceive us as wacky. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I'm very much looking forward to having this conversation with you. I mean, for the very reasons that you talked about, but also because of the journey that you've been on and your backstory and how it's made such a difference for you. And so I'm just even honored that you invited me to be on to talk about this, because it is a wacky world out there. At least that's the way most people perceive it when it comes to hypnosis. So this is certainly not something I put on my 5-year vision when I was getting ready to graduate high school.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I had no idea what I was going to do, but as divine synchronicity would have it, things just kind of unfolded in my life that kept nudging me towards helping professions. And that started out in nursing. Back in 1994, I became a registered nurse. And I noticed fairly quickly that mindset was everything. I would meet patients and people who had that really optimistic and positive attitude in the belief that they could get better. They healed more quickly. And I would just always say to my patients, your attitude is great. That's half the battle. Well, when I became a hypnotist, I learned it's 99% of the battle. And we can get into that, in a moment. But the way that I ended up here was when I moved to Connecticut, met my husband, ended up becoming a nurse anesthetist. And through that process, just to, kind of touch on something that your listeners might be familiar with, we had a sentinel event in the hospital, which is considered a never event. And it was a patient that had been medicated for pain in the recovery room. And, the recovery room is a very noisy place. And what that means is stimulation, things that will keep you awake and aroused. Once he met criteria, they sent him upstairs to the floor. And once he got settled in his room, he started becoming agitated and anxious. The nurse went in and the patient had a history of alcohol abuse. And she skipped one of the most vital steps that should have happened. She did not check vital signs. She made the assumption he was already going into DTs, went to the hospitalist and said, he's in DTs. I need Ativan. What was actually happening was his blood levels of carbon dioxide had risen too high from the pain medication. And so the only drive he had to breathe was this stimulation of lack of oxygen. And when they gave him the Ativan, it took away that drive. And the gentleman did not survive that event. And I thought to myself, when I went through anesthesia training, I learned so much more about pain management than I did as a nurse, which is dosage, complications, when not to give it. That was the extent of it. You have orders, and as long as it's safe, you administer the medication. When I went through the research, I uncovered study after study after study of hypnosis for pain management. I mean, surgical pain management, people having lung surgery and not requiring an epidural because hypnosis was so effective. Well, that got my attention. And it took me several years. This is pre-Google and Facebook and all the things being what it is now. It took me a few years before I came across Ron Esslinger, who was a retired nurse anesthetist who was teaching hypnosis. So it was a win-win. I got anesthesia credits and I learned hypnosis. Now, in that training, have you ever seen someone do something and you're like, okay, I think I want to go try this. You've seen their website, and then for whatever reason, you end up getting called on about that specific thing and you're not certain about it. Sure. That was what happened. I had seen his videos demonstrating glove analgesia on his website. And the day that he was demonstrating it, I was the person he called up to volunteer. And I was in my head and I'm like, just do what he says. Just follow his instructions. He knows what he's doing. And he guided me into hypnosis, gave me suggestions that my hand felt like rubber. It was like sticking my hand in a cold ice chest of water. Is completely numb. And then he clamped a surgical clamp shut on the back of my hand, the one that they test to make sure you're numb when you have a C-section. And I didn't feel a thing. And that was divine synchronicity as well, because it was that event that it was like, oh my God, people have to know how powerful their brain is. And so I did a little side hustle business alongside anesthesia, working with referrals from the surgeons, the GI docs for pain, weight loss. IBS was a big one. I got all kinds of referrals from the GI group where I gave anesthesia because stress is a huge component of IBS, and the research just backs it up like crazy.
Mm.
And that was kind of the start.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, on the pain thing, that's what got my attention to do hypnobirth, which is, and I experienced some painless labors and childbirth, like ecstatic labors actually. And the thing that got my attention that made me open-minded to try it was, first of all, my first two births without self-hypnosis. That opened my mind up. And then the other thing was I saw the woman on the video, like they put the pin through her, the skin on her hand, and she was just so chilled out, like she
Yeah.
felt nothing. And I was like, okay, all right, I'm signing up. But it's interesting because you said you want people to know how powerful their minds are, and there's a lot of myth busting that needs to happen around this idea that it's mind control, right? When actually what you're doing is you are, equipping people with the ability to actually have more control. It's not about loss of control.
Exactly. I think that first and foremost, when it comes to hypnosis, if you're choosing to work with a hypnosis professional, find someone who has been formally trained and this is what they do every day. They're not a dabbler. They didn't learn about it on Reddit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Because I'm telling you, I've been down that rabbit hole, and I just
mm-hmm,
have to take a breath and step back, because you can go get a book and read to
mm-hmm.
learn how to do hypnosis. That does not make you an effective hypnotist, and it doesn't mean that you know all the nuance that goes into it as well.
Right. Yeah, I've had some interesting experiences with people that were irresponsible in the way they guided me. And I had some big wake up calls around that made me realize, okay, I don't, I'm not comfortable placing myself in the hands of just anybody. And I need to
Yeah,
make sure I choose really responsibly, just like I would any other practitioner in any field regarding my health. I'm putting
yeah.
myself in under their guidance and care. So what would you say is something, I was going to save this question for later, but it came up now. What would you say is something to look for people to help them ascertain that? Because it can feel confusing and overwhelming.
Yeah, it can. So, and here's the thing, it's not necessarily just about the certification, it's about the trainer as well. And it's the hypnotist and the responsibility that they take to continue learning. So, the National Guild of Hypnotists certification has a basic foundation, and then individual practitioners can build their curriculum out around it. I'm going to be honest with you, if you reach out to a hypnotist and you really start quizzing them on their training, it might make people feel very uncomfortable. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying, well, what kind of techniques do you use? And there are a couple of other organizations. I stand behind the NGH because they have ethics standards, guidelines, and we have a legislative liaison that keeps their finger on the pulse of what's happening legislatively in the United States, and they will support you. If you're staying within those guidelines, they will support you if any issues were to come up, any questions. But look for someone who practices on a regular basis. Ask them. So if you're working with a specific issue, let's say IBS, or let's say you're thinking about your child and getting hypnosis for bedwetting or to overcome fear of sleeping away from home or whatever, ask them how often they do hypnosis for that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is something special required? Do you have experience with this? Personally, I mean, small kids are pretty easy at storytelling, but if it was a unique issue, I would want somebody who works with kids all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So ask about the training, ask, how often they see clients, what's their wait list look like. And if it's that unique issue, you can even ask them, what kind of continuing education can you do? I'm actually in a group where conversational hypnosis is taught. And I also teach conversational hypnosis. I don't offer a certification with that, but you must already be certified. But there are people who offer this training to people who've never taken a hypnosis training. They've never had ethics training. They don't understand how the mind works. They don't understand what to do, if trauma comes up in those kinds of things. And people were actually told in that group, well, if someone asks you where you got your training, they're going to be a pain in the ass client. So they're not a fit. Well, I beg your pardon. Client has every right to be able to trust in you. Now, if they wanted to dissect my stuff away, then yeah, I mean, there's micromanagement and fear and overthinking that come into play. But just in general, if someone is trusting you with their mind, which houses your identity, that is your most precious asset. It is who you are. Right. So someone has every right to know. So I apologize. There's no black and white answer, but follow your gut. If your intuition, or you're just feeling like, I really don't think this is a good fit, that's okay. Go find another hypnotist. Right. I've told people who reached out to me and they're like, I'm not sure. And I'll say, well, it feels like maybe, you just kind of feel like it's not resonating working with me. And it's like, yeah, I know you're really good, but I'm like, I can refer you to other people. What's most important is you feel good about who you're working with. And then I bless and release, because I'm not everybody's flavor, and that's okay.
I don't know why not, though. You should be.
I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes Penny has to drop the hammer.
That's okay. The hammer needs to be dropped, maybe. Yeah. Well, yeah, fun fact, I'm a student of Penny's. I'm a student of yours, and the conversational hypnosis training has blown my mind. It's so just radical as far as yielding the transformation efficiently, effectively. I actually had somebody get really angry on social media recently because I talked about efficient, effective transformation. And they wanted to tell me that, no, that's not, that's a quick fix and that's not real. And they would prefer to stay in their pain. They were attached to their struggle, I think, and their identity. Speaking of identity, seemed very wrapped up in that. And I understand that. I've been there too, but it is possible. And having the foundation of being already trained as a hypnotist, and then the experience there, and then adding that on is just such a game changer, I think. I'm so happy that you are adding that, because I feel like your training is it's ever evolving, and you're just bringing a lot of, like I said, a lot of credibility, and helping people enter this field who can actually really make a difference and help people with whatever they specialize in,
Yeah, with conversational hypnosis, there's a lot of unlearning, that has to happen to really implement that. And here's where I was when I first started. Most hypnosis goes after the symptom. So if somebody's nail biting, you go in and they read you scripts and stories and metaphors around not biting your nails anymore. But what caused that to start? Now, you don't always have to go to knowing why it started, but my first certification that I took, where, I had the clamp shut on the back of my hand, it was a basic, it was broad, and it was shallow. And I was scrambling because most of my clients had emotion-driven issues. So I started self-learning, digging into everything I could. And then that was when I heard about 5-Path. And I started learning about 5-Path. I did a self-study with it and immediately saw my results skyrocket. I'm like, holy crap. If I ever train people, this is what I'm going to train people in. Now, that process has been the mainstay of my practice up until 4 years ago. And it still is a mainstay of my practice. These numbers are going to sound a little weird. 95% of my clients, I take through all or some part of that process. But 95% of my sessions are conversational, and that doesn't sound intuitive, but it's because I can get so much done in a conversational session. But when you realize that people do things because that's a symptom, and if you can help them disconnect whatever is creating the emotional drive to do that, especially if there's a misperception or a limiting belief or some self-deprecating belief that they have, that is going to ripple into everything else. And that is where you get lasting transformation. Now, people who don't have emotion-driven behavior, scripts and stories and metaphors, that stuff works really quick. But for emotion-driven, it is going to be very what we call gunshot effect. You don't know what's going to hit the target. And that's why with a classical style of hypnosis, it takes a lot longer to get results than if you're using a directed approach, such as bypass or conversational hypnosis. You don't need a therapy degree to do it. But what I've added, you talked about how it's ever evolving. I realized that what I didn't get and what some of my graduates were missing was the nuance around identity. It's more than just throwing suggestions at people as to the benefits they want. Who are they being? What do they think? What do they believe when they have achieved what they want? And that becomes the foundation and that process of that directed approach. So all of that nuances now is part of getting certified with me. It feels out of integrity to teach people a technical skill and leaving them on their own to figure out how to fill in the background.
So that's a process. You take people through that identity process
Yes,
before they do any of your other training.
Yes, it's part of the self-study now. That's something new that's been added in the last few months.
Okay. So I'm originally 5-path trained, and I feel like it feels like such a gift. It just landed in my lap that 5-path was the way to go. So that's the way I did it. And I originally trained with a different teacher, and then I came back and I've trained with you since. Where do you see conversational hypnosis going in the field? Because it's still, a lot of people don't know about it. It's not super mainstream yet.
Yeah, so a lot of people think of conversational hypnosis, people who are in the field, they think of it as language patterns, stories, metaphors, like there's a structure around it. I teach the freestyle version where it's truly client led. If you've ever seen someone have a Freudian slip, that was their subconscious mind talking to you. So freestyle conversational works off of identifying those moments when they bubble up. And it can look like anything from an uncomfortable shift in the chair to laughter to tears to all of a sudden speeding up the conversation and racing off in a different direction. Something came up. And when you understand how to refocus the attention on that and how to ask effective questions that don't attempt to solve the problem, what you're doing is you're skipping the pre-talk, the pre-hypnosis interview, the induction, the deepening, and everything that happens. You're skipping all of that, and you're going right to giving the mind the opportunity to choose a better way of thinking. And there are a couple of people that I've met who are naturally adept at this, and they don't even know what they're doing. They're not hypnotists. They're just naturally adept at having these conversations and it happening. And I think if therapists and social workers and counselors knew what I'm teaching in this conversational hypnosis, just to ask better questions, they unlock the opportunity for change in people without having to do a formal session.
I just have like full body goosebumps because it's so true. And I had a therapist recently was interested in working with me as a hypnosis client, and I had that same thought. I was like, wow, with the work that she's doing, she's probably going to be so inspired from the results that are possible with this when she
Yeah.
sees how much more accelerated, like how accelerated the process can become. And also, I just referred a friend who's a social worker to you also because she saw, she was so excited by it. And she was like, this could help my people so
Yeah.
much. Where she's like trying to find that doorway in, because it's like, you're right, you can't fix something for somebody, because when you're trying to fix something for somebody, there's so much projection involved in that. And it's like one of our teachers says, this always makes me laugh. Cal says, the problem with every therapy, every kind of therapy, is the therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
it really takes us, I mean, obviously our training, and we're equipped and trained to be able to see, like you're saying, those subconscious moments and when those bubble up,
Yeah.
and then direct accordingly and understanding how to navigate the subconscious. But it really takes us out of the equation.
It does. The moment we assume to know what the issue is, we derail the whole thing. It's really, and the other thing is, how do you get to this place of not projecting? I said this to you guys on day one. Let go of caring about whether or not the client gets a result.
Mm-hmm.
Just stop caring. And that sounds callous, but it's not. Because if we're focused on the result, we can unwittingly become focused on what they said the presenting issue was. And that's not the issue. It's something else underneath the surface. So we lose track
Mm-hmm.
when we start focusing on that tiny thing. And then the beautiful thing is, once you've practiced for a while, you just finished level 2, which is the motivational. And this is where conversation becomes transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Yeah,
it's very suitable for kids,
very.
teachers who have some hypnosis background, because it's motivational. It's not about hypnosis, it's about flipping the way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to, so it's such good stuff. I recently had a client who had a pretty quick shift. She came with a
Mhm.
phobia, and she was so overwhelmed with gratitude after she experienced this, because she was able to show up in this circumstance totally differently. She just witnessed herself have a different response, and she couldn't even believe it. And she was so overwhelmed. And she said, she was new to hypnosis. She had never tried it before. And she said, she's a very logical, practical person. And that's a superpower. But she was like, because I don't have it. I mean, sometimes I do. But she said, I always thought of hypnosis as a woo profession. She said, I have such profound respect for your profession and what you do. I'm almost going to cry. She said, because she was blown away. She said, never again will I think that. She's like, this is legit. So I'm wondering if you can just, I don't know, just speak to that a little bit.
You know, people from all walks of life have been impacted by what hypnosis can help them achieve. And everybody brings their own flavor to it. You have people out there that specialize in quantum healing, other people that specialize in past life regression. There are people that specialize in spiritual aspects. But I don't think it necessarily takes away the legitimacy of what they're doing. However, those people might not have the background of what you're wanting to focus in and change. There are two things that are pet peeves for me in the hypnosis industry. I want permission to share them, because it's a very unpopular opinion, because people are afraid that it will make people skeptical of hypnotists. But I feel like quite the opposite is true.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So the first one, I was always taught, if someone reaches out to you and says, hey, can you do hypnosis to help me with blank? I was taught to always say, absolutely, hypnosis can help with that. even if I've never done it,
Mhm.
didn't know what they were talking about. Run, go look it up on Google, write a script.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, I learned that anything that stress aggravates, hypnosis can help in some way. But can hypnosis directly change it? There's literature all over the place for that. But I feel, in transparency, that's the way I would say it. Well, if stress is aggravating it, you're worried over it, you're fixated on it, hypnosis can definitely help you improve that, because the stress is at least making it worse. And then we can go from there. I can do some research and see, to the degree that
Sort of
hypnosis can
like how
positive.
inflammation would cause pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when it comes to pain specifically, we have 5 areas of the brain that feed into the actual pain perception. We've all seen or heard of people who were severely injured, but they managed to save other people and the pain didn't stop them. But then as soon as they were done, there was so much pain, they were in shock. And that's because our brain has our conscious attention. What we're anticipating is going to happen, our emotions and our memories of our past experiences, those 4 things will either amplify, decrease, or can even block perception of pain.
Mhm.
So I think it's huge to know that about pain specifically. But the other thing is when people will say hypnosis is completely safe. I 100% disagree with that statement.
Mhm.
Hypnosis is safe when you are working with a professional and ethically trained hypnotist, because some people don't know what they don't know.
Mhm.
They don't understand the power of what they do. And I've honestly had a couple of clients over the years, and this is, I don't know if this comes to bear on the hypnotist or who trained them, the training, that's none of my business. I can just say that I've had 2 people that came to me because something that was said to them when the hypnosis session was over stuck.
Mm.
And it affected their belief that they could change.
Mm.
And they believed that they always were going to be the way that they were. And, that we have a responsibility as hypnotists that if a client exceeds our abilities and our talents, to say, you know what, I truly believe hypnosis can help this, but I have exhausted my, what I know to do for you. I recommend that you go see this person over here. Because I've had people come to me and say, I was told I can't be hypnotized. I said, well, before you pay me, before we do anything, I want to know that you can be hypnotized. And so right there on the consult call, I take them through a process and I can confirm that they're in a deep state of hypnosis and do a test so that they also know without a doubt that they've experienced hypnosis.
Mhm.
What happened in the other situation? I don't know. Maybe they had a bad day.
Mhm.
Maybe their anxiety levels were high. Maybe the other person didn't know how to adapt to them and only knew one technique. I don't know. But when we say things like that to people, they carry that with them.
Mhm.
And then they have this in their identity that they can't be helped.
Yeah. Also, the research around the mind, right? I mean, it really is pretty science-based. I mean, it can be deeply spiritual, and I know that we're
Yeah.
aligned on that. And to me, doing subconscious work and evolving your spiritual experience and practice are very much synonymous for me, and they can be for anybody if they wish for it to be, if that's what they're open to. If they're not,
Yeah.
that's perfectly fine. But there's a lot of research to back that up.
Well, there is. And there are people who will still say that hypnosis is fake, but with functional MRI scans and EEGs and showing what regions of the brain light up, there's no question in the scientific community if
Mhm.
the hypnotic state exists or not, and whether or not people respond to suggestions in that state. There's zero question. Now the research is headed in the direction of understanding more about how are some of these changes actually happening in the brain, because people will experience placebo effects. And one thing that they do know is the insula, a region in the brain, it is active in hypnosis. And the insula is also the region of the brain that is active when the placebo response gets activated. And a lot of people think that placebo response means symptoms were all in a person's head. That is not what placebo means. Placebo means that the belief in a treatment activated the body's innate ability to heal. That's all that means. In my book, I talked about a study where there was this gentleman, he knew he was receiving the placebo pill, but his pain was so dramatically decreased and his quality of life was so improved. He asked them, can you keep giving me these little red pills? And they're like, but it's the placebo. He said, I don't care. It worked. That's what, so he was taking sugar pills to eliminate his pain. So once the brain had the belief, it took care of what it needed to take care of.
Yeah, I think when people really start to understand that, like actually realize that it can be that simple, that it really just stems from that. You were talking about the stress. I just wanted to go back saying if you can affect their stress level and stress response, and that can change everything. And I was reading something this morning. I just happened to open an email that I don't normally open from this person whose list I'm on, and she's a nervous system expert. And she was talking specifically, she was answering some questions about hormonal issues for women and their nervous system and how nervous system regulation so greatly impacts. And she was explaining why, and she was talking about, blood vessels restricting, and she was giving a whole explanation. And it was so amazing because like it immediately connected for me my birth knowledge and understanding of why hypnosis works and why it could become a painless experience. Because when you are regulating your system and you're calming your system and you're able to drop into that natural state and go subconscious, you're removing the restriction that enables oxygen even to flow through the blood vessels to your uterus, to allow your uterus to do exactly what it needs to do without pushback.
It needs to relax.
It needs to relax.
The cervix needs to relax. The pelvic floor's got to relax, and it can't do that when you're afraid and you're stressed out.
Right. I just was like, wow, I hope, that people can become more open and less afraid. And I understand, because I also understand that the nervous system wants to just naturally protect itself from something that's unfamiliar. So it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Yeah. But that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation, just to demystify it a little.
Yeah. I think that a few myths. People think that if their mind is busy and they can't quiet their mind, that hypnosis won't work. Well, just get into the practice, whether you're listening to audios or whatever, get in the practice of focusing your attention on the words being spoken, and you will learn to quiet your mind in that process. And people will think, well, I can't relax, so I can't go into hypnosis. And that's the one misperception that I hate to see be perpetuated by hypnotists, telling people hypnosis is a profound state of relaxation. Yes, you can become profoundly relaxed, but hypnosis is a brain state. And I've had too many people who had 10 out of 10 pain that simply guiding them, facilitating that hypnotic state and shutting off the activation of that stress response, and the brain realizing, I'm safe right here. I know I'm okay. Their pain dropped to zero. They'll walk out of my office with zero pain, and it lasts that way for days until they hit a trigger that would ramp up their stress. And then, we go from there, continuing to work on those things. So even people who are low hypnotizable can be hypnotized. It's just not as easy as somebody who's high hypnotizable. If you can follow instructions, you can go into hypnosis.
So there's a lot of different myths. Sometimes I feel like it comes down to finding the right voice or the right fit for what you're listening to also, because not everybody's approach is going to resonate. And I just recently did a birth recording for somebody to help them with a calm, conscious birth that they're committed to having. And they didn't want to do like a whole program. So I curated them their own recording. When you have somebody's outcome that they're wanting and you know how they tick, it can also be helpful to speak to them in a way that's going to resonate. And
Yeah.
she didn't think that she could relax. With the other recordings that she listened to, she was like, so she was sort of agitated and she couldn't relax. It's kind of like this myth that people think also that they can't meditate because they think that they have to quiet their mind in order to meditate. It's sort of like waiting till you're in perfect shape to go to the gym almost, it's like it's a little backwards. But we have all these ideas about what we think it's supposed to be. And then she just listened and she just was like, oh, wow, she was so relieved. She was just put at ease. Like she heard what she needed to based on what her apprehensions were. And she was so relieved because she was able to receive those suggestions in that state. And then it shifted her.
Yeah. I mean, resonance is everything. And back in the day when you would order CDs, I've spent money on CDs and they came in and the voice was like nails on a chalkboard.
Mm-hmm.
I just gave them away.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't feel good, try something else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not everyone is for everyone. So this has been amazing. Amazing. Tell my listeners where they can find you and where they can find your training programs, because you not only you train people to become hypnotists, but you also have other programs that aren't necessarily certification programs as well, and different cool things.
Yeah. So probably the easiest way to find me is over on Instagram. Like I'm not posting over there every day, but that's probably the most logical. It's at Penny.Chiasson. Chiasson. That's how you spell it. I won't haze the doctor who said that my name was weird and his was 10 times weirder. And that's how he remembered to spell it. The hypnosis certification that can be found at pennychiasson.com/certify me. I also teach the conversational hypnosis. There are 2 levels to that. One is the problem solving, and then the other is the motivational piece that speeds up the first piece once you've gotten to know it. And then I have the master pain management hypnosis. Now, you need to be a certified hypnotist to use this program because it does not teach you hypnosis. It gives you just enough of understanding about how the brain processes pain and the different things that feed into that pain so that you can have a conversation with a client and come up with a plan to help them through that pain. Every pain training I took, that was the gap. There was a gap in understanding, where should I start with this client? Like, what is the most important thing? And where do I move from there? And that is really the gap that the program really covers in that process. So all of those are on the website.
Well, thank you so much for coming and taking your time and chatting.
Oh, I love chatting about this stuff. I eat, sleep, and breathe it.
Yes, I know. Okay, until next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mae B Mindful Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. For more information, resources, and exclusive content, visit our website at maybemindful.com or go ahead and follow us over on Instagram at maybemindful. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please give me a follow, screenshot the episode, and go ahead and tag me until next week when I bring you another thought-provoking and inspiring topic. Until then,